Hey everybody, it's Mr. Marshall. It's Tony Lean again. Last time we were together, we began reading a biography about Sojourner Truth, right? And today we're going to continue that, right? So let's remember some of the things that we learned last time. One of the things we learned last time is that we were going to think about the work of readers inside of a biography. And these are some of the things we thought about in the beginning of the book. But today we're going to think more about the middle, right? What hardships did my subject have? What hardships did Sojourner Truth have? And how did they shape her, right? How did they affect her? We're also thinking about the relationships inside the story, right? Because the relationships, I'm pointing to the wrong thing. The relationships are an important part of the story. The people that are kind of living in the story, they have relationships with each other. And so it's also another thing we can be thinking about. And inside our book, we were thinking in the beginning of the book how slavery kept Isabella, because that was her name when she was young, away from people she loved. And we started thinking about these characters who were good characters. They were the kind of characters that helped Isabella in all her problems. So we're starting to notice that there's some good characters inside this book. So let's keep reading and think more about these things. Let's think about how slavery may have kept her away from people she loved, but there are also good people that were helping her. All right, so let's think about that stuff as we go on. Ready? So last time we read, the Van Wageners had just freed her, right? So let's keep going. Isabella worked for the Van Wageners because she still needed to work for money. But that's the difference, is now she was working for money, not because she had to, because she was a slave. Through the winter of 1826. Then in 1827, she learned that her 5-year-old son Peter had been sold by Dumont to Solomon Gedney, who sold Peter to an Alabama planter. Such a sale to someone outside of New York State was against the law. So now there's more problems, right? There's more problems. So it's slavery is again taking her away from people who she loves, right? Because now her son named Peter gets added to this list too, right? So it's another example of someone who was taken away from her. And there's another character here who is Solomon Gedney, who did this illegal thing, right? He sold Peter to someone in Alabama. All right, something's going to happen now. Let's take a look. Isabella told Mrs. Dumont, "I'll have my child again." She went to court, sued Gedney, and won. She was one of the first African American women in the United States to win a lawsuit against a white man. Okay, so now we're cooking, right? Now we're cooking. Something important just happened. She just made history. She was one of the first African American women to win a court case against a white man. And what an important case that was, right? In 1829, Isabella took Peter and moved to New York City, where she worked as a servant. Then in 1833, she went north to Sing Sing, New York, and joined a religious community called the Kingdom of God. She gave it all her money and did most of the work. In 1834, the leader of the kingdom died. Isabella was wrongly accused in a New York newspaper of poisoning him and trying to poison others too. She sued the reporter for hurting her good name, and again she won. The newspaper and the man who gave the false story were ordered to pay Isabella $125. All right, so now something else happened, right? She was accused of killing people, right? So I'm going to put that here because that's like with this Gedney thing. So the poisoning, and again she won. So these two things are kind of like the same, right? Because she's won. Like, people tried to do bad things. People did bad things to her. And it's a good word. She like overcame them. She overcame them which was so much of a big deal, especially in that time, in that setting, for an African American person, an African American woman to overcome these kinds of problems. That's pretty amazing, isn't it? So let's keep reading. Isabella returned to New York City and worked as a servant, but she was unhappy there and said, "The rich rob the poor, and the poor rob one another." In June 1843, she told the woman for whom she worked that she was going west. "The spirit calls me there," she said, "and I must go." So it sounds like something important's about to happen. She's moving, right? She's moving because she just needs to be in a different place. She also told the woman that she was no longer Isabella, but Sojourner, since she planned to sojourn or travel and move about and visit different places and to preach. And since she considered God to be her only master, and his name was Truth, she called herself Sojourner Truth. Sojourner's travels took her thousands of miles across many states. She preached on religion, spoke out against slavery, and stood up for the rights of women. Her humor, common sense, and the power of her ideas made her one of the great speakers of her time. So, you know what it's making me think? It's making me think that she was so upset and so angry that she went and did this. She tried to take all these terrible things that had happened to her and do something good about them, right? Sometimes that happens. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes someone's life has so many bad things that they kind of want to do a good thing, a really big good thing. So it looks like that really affected her, right? And so as I'm thinking inside the middle of the book, there was that question: what hardships did Sojourner have? There were lots of hardships, and they really affected her, because that's the thing we want to think about, not just naming the hardships. Like first and second graders can figure that out, but you have to figure out how those hardships affected her. That's really important. So let's write about that. Let's write about that. Let's think about that. So Sojourner had hardships because of slavery. I'm just jotting really quickly, and my handwriting is going to be really sloppy, but that's okay. Sojourner had hardships because of slavery, and they made her do important things. So I'm going to put that in a big box, right? Sojourner had hardships because of slavery, and they made her do important things. So let's see. What was one example? One example was all the court cases that she won, right? The court cases. And then she went off and she moved and preached to kind of teach people about how bad slavery was, right? So she was doing something very important, something very good, because of the bad things that had happened to her. Sojourner Truth neither could read nor write, but wherever she went, community and anti-slavery leaders came to hear her speak. She knew much of the Bible by heart. "I talk to God," she said, "and God talks to me." Let's keep going. A woman who heard her in Akron, Ohio, wrote later that Sojourner Truth stood nearly 6 feet tall, head erect, and eyes piercing the upper air like one in a dream. At her first word, there was a profound hush. She spoke in deep tones, which, though not loud, reached every ear in the house. Sojourner Truth called slave owners sinners, who soon would be punished by God. She laughed at the idea that women were weaker than men. "Look at me," she said. "I have plowed and planted, and ain't I a woman?" She even pulled up her sleeve and showed the audience her muscular arm. "Sisters," she said, "if women want any rights, more than they got, why don't they just take them and not be talking about it?" Wow. So now that's another important thing she's doing, right? Because of all this, like the terrible things that happened to her, she's also like fighting for women, because women didn't have equality then either. So she's fighting for women, right? So she's like really making history here. And this is before the Civil War. This is before slaves were free and she was helping them. This was before women had more rights and she was helping them, right? It sounds like she did some really important things because of the bad things that happened to her. Let's keep going. In 1849, Sojourner visited her old master, John Dumont. In my slaveholding days, there were a few who spoke against it, he said. Now there were many abolitionists. Those were people that felt like slavery should be abolished or ended, right? Talking about the horrors of slavery, including Sojourner Truth. John Dumont said slavery was the wickedest thing in the world, the greatest curse the earth had ever felt. Sojourner later called Dumont a slave-holding master turned to a brother. And so now I'm thinking that remember how we're thinking about relationships, right? So Sojourner and this guy Dumont had a really different relationship, right? It kept changing. So in the beginning, Sojourner and Dumont, um, they they had a bad relationship, right? Because Dumont owned her, owned Sojourner, but she was called Isabella then, right? And then when Isabella tried to escape, Dumont tried to get her, right? And Dumont, how should we say this? Tried to keep Sojourner a slave. Well, then later on it changed, right? Because later on, Dumont learned slavery was bad and he respected Sojourner, right? Because he changed. He changed. So, like, their relationship is changing. How awesome that must have been for her to see that her work made someone change in such a big way, right? Let's read a tiny little bit more today. Sojourner Truth told the story of her life to her friend Olive Gilbert, who wrote it down. In 1850, the narrative of Sojourner Truth was published. The money Sojourner earned selling copies of her book helped support her while she traveled and spoke. In 1857, Sojourner Truth bought a house near Battle Creek, Michigan, and some of her children and grandchildren moved there to be with her. So now she's getting older, right? Her kids have grown up and they have kids of their own. And it sounds like her life has gotten better, although there are still hardships, right? So do you see the work we did today? We thought about this bigger idea now, right? Because before our idea was kind of simple, right? Slavery kept Isabella away from the people she loved. It's true, but most people could kind of figure that out. Like if you're a slave, stuff like that's going to happen to you, right? And today we started thinking about how she was different. She was special. Sojourner had hardships because of slavery, and they made her do important things. And now her life is starting to change. Her relationships are changing, right? Her relationships are changing, and the world is changing too. I'm starting to think the world around her is changing. She's really helping slavery to go away, right? But it's still not away. It's only 1857. The Civil War hasn't begun, but she's helping that to happen. So tune in next time, and we'll finish the book. See you later.